Welcome all. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Jody Herford and working with Stephen Cole and as well Michael C. and as well Heather, who's down at the University of Alabama to bring you MI Med Stories, where we have a little bit of an opportunity to share a bit about transforming conversations in healthcare using motivational interviewing and as well health coaching. And today we're thrilled to have with us Tyler Anderson, who's working at Verta. But a couple of quick things about MI Med, just for those of you who aren't familiar. As we said, it's motivational interviewing in medicine and healthcare. And we kind of expand that definition of motivational interviewing to be encompassing really into coaching, compassionate conversation and communication in healthcare. And I know we've all had those opportunities where we know healthcare communication can be improved. So we meet for MI Med Stories every other month, the second Monday, and are able to really have some folks sharing. So if you have anyone that you know, if you have a story to share, we'd love to welcome you to share your story. So get in touch. And the easiest way to do that, Stephen just let us know that we now have an MI Med website. Michael will put that into, I see he's put that into the chat as well. So it's mi-med.org, I believe, not .com. Is that correct, Steve?
Correct, .org.
So mi-med.org is the website. And certainly it's a work in progress, as Steve said. It's just brand new, so fresh and hot off the press. So as we continue forward and onward, that will continue to be more of a resource to you. And it will also be housing all the recordings of previous sessions as well. So couple of things. I know Michael has invited folks to go ahead and please let us know where you're from. And I'm going to also ask you to let us know what kind of work are you involved in. I think, that'll help Tyler to be able to kind of look through that to say, what are you currently doing? How are you looking at improving healthcare communication in your arena? And that way it gives us an idea as to where folks are and what they're doing. Steve or Michael or Heather, have I missed anything that you'd like to say about MI Med Stories? Steve is really our visionary behind it. And
Well, the only thing I might add, Jody, is that we had an asterisk when we first started, and I would like to encourage it, that these are stories, but we are hoping in the informal stories, it's not encouraging people, we are encouraging people to show and tell if they'd like, but it's really about learning. So it's lessons learned and solutions sought. And we don't, having done this now for 3 or 4 years, not too many presentations are solutions sought, meaning here's my situation, at least this is what our original intent was, and I'm faced with this, and here's my fledgling attempt. I'm interested in learning some more from the rest of you. So in the informal side, we have had we've had a host over the years, and we're going to try to be posting them, of 20 or 30 just superb stories which we can learn from. But I would just want to emphasize the side of where we can request help from each other, and so much we still need to learn. And I really want to encourage people to present their issues and concerns to us as a forum. So I wanted to take a moment to emphasize the subtitles, lessons learned through our struggles and efforts and solutions sought.
great. Thanks for sharing that, Steve. Appreciate it. So we're going to shift gears, turn the corner and into the highlight of today, which is Tyler's presentation titled Digital Health Coaching, a Vital Intervention in Disease Reversal. And as I mentioned earlier, Tyler and I have known one another for years, and I see as well online some of our folks that were in the health coach training program together at Cresser. Good to see so many familiar faces. And just as a quick background and introduction to Tyler, um, as we said, Tyler works with Verta Health. And if I think, Michael, I think I saw that you'd tucked the Verta Health Earl website in. So it's vertahealth.com. And Verta Health, for those of you who aren't familiar, I'm always intrigued with their mission of we're on a mission to reverse diabetes and obesity in 1 billion people, not million. That's B with or billion with a B. So I'm always intrigued as to really looking at their business model, but as well when Tyler and I talk, it's really a mission-driven focus and a heart-driven focus to really look at the impact that chronic illness has on individual lives. So it's near and dear to my heart, and we were thrilled when Tyler agreed to present their work. So as a quick introduction on Tyler, hold on one quick second. Let me pull that one up. Tyler's a registered dietitian and board certified health coach as his professional background. And he currently is the health coach manager at Verta Health. And I think this is another little glimpse into who Tyler is, because prior to joining Verta, Tyler led nutrition sessions for a nonprofit health clinic in Chicago. He also worked as a community health volunteer in the Peace Corps, serving in rural Paraguay. And he currently lives here in Denver, Colorado. We share a home state here, and we both love spending time outside, outdoors, anything we can do to find time in our good old Rocky Mountains. So with that as our kind of intro, I'm going to hand it off over to Tyler, and with a great big thank you so much for being here, Tyler.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Jody. And hello, everybody. Yeah, excited to share more about Verta. So give me a sec while I share my screen. All righty. Well, cool. So as Jody mentioned, I'm obviously Tyler, and I've been with Verta for like 5.5 years now. So it's been an interesting journey to see how the company's evolved and learned a lot about how to really reverse chronic disease at scale. So I'll get a little bit into, my background, how I came to coaching in the first place, also a little more of Verta's history and how we got to where we are today, before I dive into, the meat of the session on where does MI fit into all this? So a little bit more about Verta's care model, how we use MI, and especially how does this all look in a digital setting, since we are a telemedicine company, not seeing anybody in person, which certainly some special considerations for that type of setting, as well as where I sort of see the future of digital health coaching going based on some work I've done with our product engineering teams and obviously the growth of AI that's been happening in the past year or two. So a little bit more about me. As Jody mentioned, I live in Denver. I always say I just try to live like the stereotype Colorado lifestyle of being outside skiing. Above pictures of a trip I recently did to Japan this year, so would highly recommend for anybody who's never been, but love learning and passion for food, nutrition, and being outside. And then the professional side of things. So I've got a background in nutrition. I went to school at UW-Madison, so go Badgers. And then after I was studying in school, I was trying to decide like what do I want to do within nutrition, because I explored a number of different things. In addition to my degree in nutrition, I also had a minor in global health. So that's when I chose to work in more of the community health setting in the Peace Corps. So I lived in rural Paraguay, as Jody mentioned, did a lot of health and wellness education. I had my own radio show, some gardening, a little bit of this and that, which was a great experience. However, it also showed me that I have a lot of respect and understanding for the need for the community health worker in any health and wellness intervention. I wanted to work more on an individual setting. And that's actually what led me to meet Jody and, become a health and wellness coach through the Cresser Institute and Adapt Health Coach program. So that's where I really learned, a lot about how to help people change because while I had a good background and understanding of the science behind nutrition and giving good recommendations, I sort of realized that in my formal education, I never got a lot of insight on how do you actually talk to somebody about nutrition and help them change. So I learned a lot through that, applied a lot of what I learned too, in what I would call more of a traditional healthcare setting, which was federally qualified healthcare clinic in Chicago. And there I was working with a lot of low income folks, recent immigrants, refugees. So a tricky patient population to say the least. And I was still working on a very similar patient population, though, as Verda, in the sense that I was receiving referrals from providers for people with type 2 diabetes, who wanted to lose weight, who had high blood pressure, various forms of metabolic disease. And one thing I noticed while working there was that the care model that traditional healthcare uses isn't really created probably for that chronic disease patient, nor to help somebody really change their lifestyle. Because I was seeing people maybe every 4 to 6 weeks if I was lucky. Didn't really have any collaboration with the doctors in the clinic either. It'd sort of be like, we're gonna send you need some nutrition thing, send him to Tyler, he'll do his nutrition thing, and then if they need to have any medication side effects, they'll come back to us. But there was really no, collaboration and coordination there. Another, challenge I think I saw in that setting was just lack of really good biomarkers to see progress. Oftentimes I would maybe have like one fasting blood sugar in the past 6 months to go off of to start giving recommendations and assessment on. For anybody who's worked with, diabetes knows that blood sugar can fluctuate a lot from hour to hour, day to day, let alone over the course of 6 months. So really tough when you can't, see the progress of the intervention you're putting into practice. And then the other thing I noticed was that there are a lot of no-shows for appointments, and that was both nutrition appointments and even appointments for PCPs. I mean, the people we're working with, lots of complexity there, and it just takes a lot to go to a physical location for even a 30-minute appointment. So when I heard about Verta Health, which was actually, I think, on a nutrition podcast that I was listening to, they talked about using low carb nutrition to help reverse type 2 diabetes and doing it in a virtual setting. So immediately that clicked for me because I'm like, I know the research behind that. That's pretty well backed. And then just the care model as well was solving a lot of the problems that I was encountering. So I'll get into a little bit more though about where Verta's at today and how I got there. So before we dive in, Jody kind of, did a nice little teaser on this. We'd love to hear how many people worldwide are living with either type 2 diabetes, prediabetes, and or obesity. So I'd love to hear some guesses in the chat. And the hint is it's over 1 billion. We're not creating more people with type 2 diabetes and obesity for our mission. I don't know if I can see, where's the chat? I don't know if I can see that on my end. Oh, here we go. Let me pull it up. All right.
Got it, Tyler?
2 billion, there we go. Yep.
Right.
Different ratios. Very nice. Well, I'll say about 2.2 billion, and I'll say too, like, this is not an official statistic that's really tracked. So I kind of grabbed some stats from like WHO and a few other organizations to put this together. But close to 150 million people in the US and 2.2 billion worldwide. And the unfortunate part of that statistic too is it's growing year over year and has been for the past probably 30 or 40 years. I'm sure many of you are also aware of the statistics out there for childhood obesity, which are not encouraging, but we're certainly hoping to put a dent in that. And, with our mission of reversing diabetes and obesity in 1 billion people. So, I mean, just to sort of show the scale of that though, even if we're successful in our mission, which I think a lot of people would say is pretty ambitious, we wouldn't even be halfway to that problem. So certainly just a big impact on healthcare in general. So a little bit more about Verta's story though, and how do we even get to that mission of where we are today? Because it's been an evolution over the past 10 years. Actually, I was just in a meeting where we shared that I think in August we'll hit our 10-year anniversary. So how did we actually get to that audacious mission? So Verta was founded by 3 people. We had 2 scientific co-founders who are Doctors Jeff Bullock and Steve Phinney, 2 gentlemen at the top there, as well as Sami Inkinen, who's at the bottom left. So Doctors Volk and Finney were kind of the scientific masterminds behind Virta, did a lot of the research actually that our approach is based off of. And Sami is, the business side of it, how we take this research and evidence-based approach and actually bring it to the masses and turn it into a sustainable company. So before Virta, Sami had started a company called Trulia, which eventually merged with Zillow. So if any know Zillow, that's, kind of where he came from. So a lot of the Silicon Valley and tech connections. And it really got on his radar. The connection between, Dr. Volk and Finney and Sami was that he was actually diagnosed with prediabetes, even as being a competitive triathlete. So he learned, okay, this can actually be reversed with nutrition, and started asking the question of, I'm a pretty well-educated, smart guy. How have I not heard about this after I got diagnosed with this? Why is it not a first-line treatment? And basically decided it needs to become one. And the rest is history. Given that two of our co-founders, though, are PhDs and researchers, we're definitely a data-driven company and wanted to make sure there was evidence behind any approach before we scaled it up. So I'd say the fourth person who's, an honorary co-founder of sorts is the late Dr. Sarah Hallberg, who's at the bottom right. And she's the one who led a clinical trial that was really a proof of concept that this could actually work. And by this, I mean a telemedicine approach where we're prescribing a very low carb diet to help reverse diabetes and comparing that to just the traditional way of treating diabetes. So that clinical trial was started in 2015. As I'll get into here in a bit, results were very positive and encouraging. And then we started launching with our first, customers in 2017 and been scaling it up since then. So a little bit more about this clinical trial. So originally it was set up to be a 1-year clinical trial. The results were sort of positive, though. We wanted to show that this wasn't just an intervention that would last 1 year, but as we all know as well, chronic disease reversal is something that we have benefits 2-5 years out. So we actually extended the trial and had follow-ups with those patients at the 2 and 5 year mark. And the main, big picture takeaway of this is that Virta was able to reduce blood sugars, put diabetes into remission, or reverse it for many people. So getting people off meds while making improvements. So at the graph at the bottom right, you can see there, that's the percent mean improvement after 1 year. So on the right is Virta, on the left is standard of care. And basically what that's showing is that Virta showed significant improvement in blood sugars, insulin, as well as diet while reducing diabetes medications, whereas standard care was seeing things get slowly worse, basically, while increasing medication slightly. And I'll say, too, that this very much lined up with what I was doing in the work in the clinic in Chicago, because the general guidance we'd give somebody with type 2 diabetes is that this is a chronic progressive disease. The goal is essentially to get worse slower. You're not going to really get better. So showing these results were, pretty groundbreaking. And then the cool thing was that we showed that not only are we reducing blood sugar, but also people are losing significant amounts of weight and reducing their cardiovascular disease risk. So indicative that we're improving overall metabolic health as well. All right. So another, aspect of this that I sort of alluded to is the cost associated. As chronic disease is a big driver of cost, especially in the US. So I'd love to hear what people think is the current total spending, healthcare spending per year in the US to treat diabetes and obesity alone. So just those two conditions. What are some numbers? 100 billion, 500 billion, rising. Definitely rising. I can assure you that's the case, given the increasing costs of medications and then also increasing population. So it's about 600 billion. So Michael, pretty spot on. And costs are 2.6 higher per patient per year for people with diabetes compared to the general population. I bring this up because this is a big part of, Virta's business model and, why we focused on this disease state, because not only do you have the incentive from obviously patients who want to be healthier and, reverse disease, but also from employers and insurers where this is a big part of their healthcare spending. So another, kind of why were those clinical trial results so compelling is that we showed that we could get, better outcomes at a lower cost, given that we're deprescribing medications. In addition to that, what's not really mentioned in that previous slide is that the medications we were deprescribing were oftentimes ones that caused a higher risk of low blood sugar, so things like insulin. So it also improved, patient safety, less trips to the ER and such. And once again, would be something that could save costs. And then finally, given that it was done in a telemedicine setting, it in theory could be available to anyone who had a smartphone, anywhere in the US, which is something that I saw both in my experience in Chicago as well as a Peace Corps volunteer working in a rural area. That's really important for folks who might not have as much access to healthcare as others. And just to kind of show you, to, I guess, illustrate that point, that we were shooting at 1 year about 60% medication reduction compared to, usual therapy increasing slightly, or other, similar companies that might be helping people monitor diabetes still showing, drug costs going up year over year. So kind of setting the stage for Virta, but now going back to how did I make it to Virta? So like I mentioned before, I was working traditional healthcare, found out about Virta. I actually applied right away once I found out about them, but had to, what I like to say, pleasantly stalk them for like a year and a half before they let me in. 5.5 years later, they haven't kicked me out yet. So I'd say it's at least going somewhat well, but it really, I think Virta's been one of the few places in my life where it's almost like more impressive once you see how the sausage is made and how much work goes into the work we do, not only from health coaches, but also engineers, product, sales, bring awareness to, how people can save costs taking this sort of approach. And when I joined Virta, I joined as a health coach. So my job was just to work with our members directly. And I did that for a few years. During that time, I also collaborated a lot with our product and engineering teams, help build out new features in the app, different AI tools using large language models and stuff that I'll get to in a bit. And now I lead a team of health coaches. So really get to have a lot of influence in the direction of the coaching team and, just how we approach coaching at Virta, which has been also really fulfilling. And then kind of zooming forward, so where's Virta at today? We had the clinical trial 2015, started taking on customers 2017, and now we have hundreds of employers and insurance that we work with. Some names you might recognize at the top there. I think another unique thing about our business model is that we have performance guarantees built in. So if we don't get the results that we claim, you get your money back essentially, which I don't think happens too much in at least traditional healthcare. And this also means that the service can be provided free of cost for the member. So it's a really nice alignment where, the member wins because they're getting healthier, off medications, feeling better. Insurance wins because they're saving money, have less, risky members for the long haul. And then obviously, we get paid to provide that service as well. So it's a really nice alignment of incentives, which is another reason I think I'm so passionate about Virta and have stayed for quite a while at this point. Another big evolution in Virta's history is that we started working just with type 2 diabetes members, but given that our trial showed that we help people lose weight, and I think we all know too, an ounce of prevention can be worth a pound of cure when it comes to chronic disease. So we really wanted to also work upstream to help people with prediabetes and obesity as well. So we now work with all three of those patient populations. And then the last, I'd say, and most recent probably evolution of Virta is working with GLP-1 medications. I feel like these days you can't really give a healthcare presentation without mentioning those medications. But we've been shown that we can already deprescribe those medications and have been doing that with our type 2 diabetes member population for years, and have also shown that we can deprescribe those medications and show lasting results for weight loss. So that's another part that we've integrated, given how much customers have been asking for it, and just another tool it is in the toolbox. So another point of, we're not completely against medications, but much more so what's the minimum effective dose and how do you find the right person and the right medication for them. And then the last point is we still publish research. We don't maybe do as big of a clinical trial as we did before, but show a lot of the ongoing research of Virta's impact. One study we published recently that's near and dear to my heart is that Virta's treatment was shown to be almost equally beneficial to people living more urban compared to rural areas. So another, kind of point that we can really use this to help people who might not have as much access to healthcare. So I thought that was really interesting and just also really encouraging to show that we could scale this and provide services to people who might not have access otherwise. All right, so that was a lot about me, a lot about Verta. But we're here for motivational interviewing, so probably some of you are asking yourself, like, what's this have to do with MI at the end of the day? And that's what I want to cover next. Because definitely an integral part of Verta's approach and getting the results we have thus far. So in general, I just want to give an overview of what's Verta's care model even look like. If somebody signs up for Verta tomorrow, what's going to happen? So at its core, Verta is a low carb, nutrition approach. So oftentimes we'll prescribe what we call a well-formulated ketogenic diet for people who are at type 2 diabetes, might be on insulin, maybe more advanced metabolic disease, you could say, and maybe less strict, but still focused on whole, unprocessed foods for others. So that might be somebody on the opposite side of the spectrum where they're younger, generally healthy, but just looking to lose weight and be more preventative. They might not have to have as strict of an approach. So we help really kind of tailor a nutrition approach that works best for that person. Each member is assigned both a health coach and provider. So that coach-provider collaboration is a big part of what the Verta Care model is. Coach's main role is day-to-day interactions with members and helping them put into practice these low-carb nutrition changes, as well as all the challenges that can come with changing lifestyle. And then the provider side of things is doing much more of the clinical work. So for our type 2 members, managing medications, deprescribing, adjusting doses, ordering labs, interpreting lab results, maybe suggesting how we might want to adjust our approach depending on different medical conditions, but lots of kind of overlap too, I'd say, between coaches and providers and collaboration between those two parties. And I think another thing that just makes Verta unique is given that coach and provider collaboration, it's a blend of clinical and coaching care. So much more clinical in nature, maybe compared to traditional coaching role. And I'll get into a bit too, but we get to have biomarker data and things that we can make a little bit more prescriptive approach. And then the way we actually communicate with members is mainly through an app. So essentially texting, the way I would describe is like maybe halfway between a text message and email and length and formality, and also mixing that in with coaching calls. So somebody would have an intake call with a nurse or nurse practitioner just to enroll. They also have an initial call with a coach as kind of get to know you, set some visiting, goal setting, and then follow-up calls kind of just as needed from there, with just depending on person to person, but following up on the day-to-day and week-to-week in the text-based format. All right, so a little bit more of a deep dive into our approach to coaching though. So like I said, we promote a low-carb approach to eating. That's what we found to work best with the patient population we serve. I'm not going to say that's the best approach for everybody, but more so the patients that we currently work with, that's generally a good starting place. And I'd say Verta really emphasizes coaching tools, combined with that clinical approach. So we definitely use a lot of different coaching frameworks such as MI, AI, stages of change, etc. And it also, I'd say, coaching at Verta requires some more in-depth knowledge on biomarker data. So things like blood sugar trends, ketone trends, weight trends, and such, and being able to use those biomarkers to really inform what is working well for this person, maybe what's their body not tolerating, making sure that we're taking an evidence-based approach to get them on a track that works for their metabolism where they're at right now. And I'd say the cool thing about that is that biomarker data allows for real-time feedback and follow-up with people, where if I see somebody's blood sugar is spiked, I can follow up with them an hour later, maybe the next day at the latest, to say like, hey, what foods did you eat? How might we adjust that meal and give that real-time feedback and coaching, versus the traditional care model where you might see your PCP every 3 months. If you see a dietitian, could be every month or two. You're trying to remember, what did I eat that day, even if you're recording with a CGM, but that real-time feedback and, I think data goes a long way with just helping open people's eyes to, okay, this is how this food affects me. And then can start to notice not only does it affect my blood sugar, but I can then notice my mood, energy levels, things like that, which oftentimes I think helps with motivation and actually making these changes stick for the long haul. And the last point I'd make about coaching at Vert is that we do hire coaches from a diverse background of skill sets. Certainly a lot of people who have a nutrition background or RDs like myself, but I think we also have on the team OTs, social workers, people with a psychology background, therapists, personal trainers, you name it, which at least for me has been really nice for my kind of professional and coaching development. Since I've got to learn from different approaches and just see how different people think through and see different patient scenarios. So I think that blending of, clinical expertise and coaching skills from various backgrounds has been, beneficial for our members since people will have different challenges that come up, but also for our coaches and just building their own skill set and knowledge. All right. So kind of what does motivation really look like in this digital setting? Because for somebody who maybe has done much more of a traditional coaching approach, and certainly where I was coming from in the past, working in a clinic, this is definitely a big adjustment and lots of, kind of special considerations and things you might have to tweak about traditional motivation interviewing guidance to make it work. So to kind of kick it off, get everybody thinking, I'd love for people to put in the chat too, like which of these questions do you think would get the most helpful engagement in a text-based setting? So if you're sending a message to somebody over text, which of these, MIS questions would you choose? I see there's some questions in the chat that I can certainly answer at the end too. So keep putting those in there. But any guesses on which of these might work best? I'll give it A, C. All right. So I'll first of all say too, this is totally just my opinion, but worked with thousands of people at this point. So I feel like I have a pretty good radar on what works and what doesn't. And I would probably go with B personally. And I'll get into this a little bit more since I understand this looks a little bit different. But what I've noticed over the years is things like a great question and something I've probably asked many times over the phone, but typing out a response on your ideal health is a very time-intensive process that might not get to the meat of it. So a lot of times I feel like it shuts people down, or they'll be like, what would your health like in a ideal world? They'll be like, I would weigh less, or something very surface level that's really not giving you helpful engagement as a coach. I would also say on C, very open and broad can be tough. I think it's almost like there's so many options. You can't talk somebody through if they say, I don't know. And if they don't know, they oftentimes won't respond. I don't know. They just won't respond at all. And now you haven't had a meaningful conversation, for the week. And then on D, this might be a little unique to Verta, but I'd say like asking permission when somebody has already gone through an intake call, a process, having the program explained to them, saying they want this. It's sort of assumed that they want to discuss their nutrition habits. So asking for permission every time oftentimes gets people a little aggravated and frustrated because they're sitting there struggling and be like, of course, like, why would I be messaging you if not for help with my nutrition? That is what I've, signed up for. Whereas B is very kind of direct and specific, which I'll kind of get into a bit on how I've seen that play out and why I think that message works pretty well for a lot of folks. So first thing, I'll say that like a lot of aspects of motivation interviewing work great over text and kind of work as is. The first one being like the overall just general spirit of MI that we want to help engage people in their own health, increase motivation, elicit change talk, foster partnership and empower them to live their best life. That is still the general approach that we use. I also say too, the general 4 processes work really well. We might put or kind of simplify it a little bit and just helping kind of discover some topic to focus on, but really then evoking what ideas the person has, where they're currently at, before what might make this important, before putting a plan in place that we can follow up on and see how it works. And then a lot of your core skills of ORs work great. Open-ended questions still get way better, more in-depth responses than a closed-ended question. Affirming wins and strengths, super important. As we all know, if you've worked with somebody on change, we can all be our worst enemy, and having that third party showing the wins, the small progress, really important as well. And then also the, double-sided reflection of, on one hand, it looks like you want this. On the other hand, it seems like this is also important. How do we, kind of go from there? Can really do a lot with building awareness. And the last thing I'd say too is, the provide illicit approach, or ask, offer, ask for sharing information. Take a very similar approach of, asking somebody first, or if they have a question, sharing a resource and then saying, but like, what would you be willing to try? How does that sound to you? Involving them in the conversation versus just giving them a meal plan and sending them on their way, which I think we all know does not work, at least for most of the population. So I'd say other parts of MI, though, don't really translate as well. So I already kind of hit on the asking permission piece. And like I said, this might be a little more Verta specific, and I think makes sense too, given the history of MI, of working with people in substance abuse programs and such who might not be even thinking about change, versus the population I typically see is already in that contemplation, maybe action stages in a lot of times where they really want help and kind of want some answers and then need some coaching and upcoming troubleshooting. But asking permission every time also in a text-based format, you can imagine if I ask permission at the end of the day, I'm personally not the most fast responder at times. So I might not get back to somebody a day after that by saying, yes, I want help. Well, then I respond to them, and then another day has maybe passed. And now all of a sudden it's 3 days have passed out of the week and we haven't really gotten anywhere yet. So sometimes you have to kind of think about how to be as efficient as possible. On that point, I'd say, I don't always avoid stacked or leading questions and sometimes find them helpful to clarify. So for instance, a question I'll often ask is somebody might share they have an upcoming vacation. And I'd say, like, how would you like to handle this vacation from a nutrition point of view? But then I might in parentheses add, like, do you want to kick your heels up, stick to low carb eating exclusively, get a balance between the two, just to let them know, like, this is actually what I'm asking. I'm trying to get a big picture view of what's your intent here, since you don't have the opportunity to clarify either if the person's confused. So just being crystal clear with your ask is important. And the same thing on like the avoidance of stack questions. Now, the nuance there, I'd say stack questions in two topics, I would still avoid. But if you have kind of a line of questioning that you want to go through, like, what potentially challenging social situations do you have coming up this week? And what plans do you already have in place of how you might want to handle them? I think that's a great one, because otherwise it's going to take a lot longer to just go back and forth to get to the conclusion of a conversation where hopefully we have some sort of actionable goal or insight for the person. And then the last one, kind of related to the, tell me about what your ideal health would look like, just those big, open-ended, powerful questions. So once again, I think those are great. And as a coach, if I feel like I'm at a spot where I really need to ask one of those and zoom out, I oftentimes would then set up a phone call with that person. That's where the phone comes in. So then we can have that back and forth coaching conversation. Somebody can talk through, explore different options much more easily and fluidly than they can over text. But I think just kind of coming out of nowhere with that, or starting there, it can just feel like a lot coming over text compared to having the conversation that's much, we have tone, a lot more of those, nonverbal indicators. Which, speaking of which, kind of some other just general challenges of, MI in a digital setting, especially over text. I'd say the number one, would be the lack of nonverbal cues. One example of how I've seen this come up, for instance, is you could have a SMART goal in place, follow up on it, saying like, how did that go for you this week? And the response might be good. Is that a good, like great, almost like, tell me more, like what works so well about it? Or is it good, like it didn't actually go well, I don't want to tell you about it. As a coach in a digital format, you don't have any thing to follow up on. So it can be definitely tricky to navigate a lot of that. On that same front, I'd say, there's a limited ability to really dive deep on certain topics, explore nuances. Another one where if I feel like I've written out a message and it's like there's 5 other things I want to say, or it's, getting to multi-paragraph long novel text. It's like, okay, maybe this is a conversation that's just easier to have over the phone. And then we can follow up over text once we've kind of already established what we're shooting for. So I think that's, one thing I've learned a lot over the years is that phone calls are great for seeing the big picture, getting the overall direction, and then what might work on. And text is super helpful with just that more smaller check-in for accountability, following on biomarkers to save it wet, tweaking plans a little bit. So a combination works really well. On the same front, there may be misunderstandings of what somebody said or a tone that's conveyed. I think so. Something to be careful is, or maybe check on is, could this be interpreted as judgmental? Because somebody's already in that kind of negative spiral mindset, and then you get a question, they're going to maybe show it with the least intent possible. So, just saying, explicitly, even like not judging or not trying to shame, but I'm coming from this point of view by asking this question. Before asking the question can be super helpful. And then, like I said before, inability to clarify quickly. So that's where on my question about what would you like to have for breakfast, or what did you have for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I added the line of like, be as specific as possible. Because I've asked that same question and might get something like, didn't have much for breakfast, salad for lunch, and full rounded meal for dinner. It's like, okay, like got a little bit, but now I'm gonna have to ask a little, like 2 or 3 more times before I actually get the full picture of what's going on here. So I think that's another thing I've found over the years is really important. All right, so now a little bit more about so that's where kind of we're at with digital coaching right now with Verb, but where are we going in the future? And I think I'd say too, like where do I just sort of see things going in the future, given a lot of the AI tools and such that have come up for the past few years. And I'll say I'm no AI expert. I probably keep as the average person, but have certainly worked with enough engineers and people who are very tuned in just to get a good sense of how they are thinking about problems and working on things, as well as just seeing how things have evolved at Coaching at Verda in the past 5.5 years. So kind of where we're at right now at Verda, at least with AI and coaching, is that we've been using AI since I joined, at least in 2019. So we've had models to predict if somebody's disengaging and they might be at high risk to drop out of the program. Also estimating someone's A1C, which is your average 3-month blood sugar, one of the kind of core metrics you'd look at for diabetes care. But obviously, if you can only do it every 3 months, sometimes it's hard to know if we're kind of heading the right path. So we can actually predict that after only a couple of weeks based on AI model. Then we also have alerts for both our coaches and providers, like which members might you want to engage this week and reach out to. Really helps with knowing who's the right person at the right time to reach out to versus, all right, I just have all these people, I got to use a spreadsheet or something, but using all this data to find that person for us, as well as using, some large language models to give like a startup message. So, quick, common question responses, things like that, just saving time of typing it out. It saves a lot of, mental drain too for both providers and coaches by having some assistance there, as well as we're starting to build out some AI assistants for both coaches and providers and for our members. So another, kind of drawback of our current model and why we're building this out is that even if our coaches are great, have tons of knowledge to share with folks, for especially like simple factual information, it might still take them a few hours or maybe the next day, business day, to get back to somebody when they have a question, versus having an AI chat GPT-esque thing that could not only answer it real time, but can clarify as much as you want. You can ask them the same question over and over again, and it'll answer with a smile on its face every time, versus a coach who might get a little annoyed. Like, we just talked about this 2 weeks ago. How do you not know already? So lots that's kind of going on already. And where I've kind of seen currently generative AI, so more of your chat GPT, kind of large language model, like where it's doing really well in the context of coaching, like giving factual information, very, great. I mean, the number of times I've been asked, like, how many grams of carbs are in this food, which are you A, you can Google, but B, doesn't require like a lot of, coaching experience to give a detailed answer on. Another one is like, personalized and, unique nutrition plans. For instance, I could say like, if you type in ChatGPT right now, like, I want a 2-week low carb, meal plan that's focused around traditional Latvian foods with these 10 ingredients, it will spit something out in probably 30 seconds, where that would take me, I don't know, hours, because I currently know nothing about traditional Latvian foods, let alone how to adapt them for a low carb lifestyle. So we've already done some things with that, but I think that's another, key tool that's going to become it more and more in different settings. Same thing with answering common questions. So I've seen this work well in Verta about just how to navigate the app. Somebody needs more strips for their glucometer to measure blood sugar. They're not sure don't remember how to do that. A coach can say that, but AI can say it just as well of where to go it and maybe order it for them right away. And then the last one I'd say is just gathering context and information about somebody. So one example of that is a couple of engineers on our team actually built like an intake call in 2 days where you could just use natural language, and it basically did pretty similar to an intake call and to get that information. But even like, my question that I put is a good question of like asking about breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Another thing doesn't take a ton of coaching skill and such. So I could see a future where you have the chatbot that's like asking somebody, how did their last week go? They can just, talk to it. It's like, oh yeah, lunches were tough. I had this work thing, all this stuff. So when I get on a call, I have a nice summary of like, here's what's going well, here's the challenges. And now I can just go right into coaching actually and not doing all of that context gathering. Now, I mean, lots of good things coming, but I'll also say too, seeing lots of places where generative AI is falling short. And honestly, when I was putting this together, I'm like, actually, a lot of this like is kind of related to MI. Like, it's not too good at connecting with other human beings at the end of the day in an empathetic manner and partnering. So one thing I could think of like connecting together multiple threads of seeing a bigger picture, like, hey, you know, something like strength spotting where hey, you work as an accountant. I know you're super analytical. How can we use that for kind of analyzing what to do in this situation? Haven't seen that much, at least come up naturally without some very specific prompting. Another one would be like seeing the bigger picture of somebody's health journey. Another question I've got at least a few times over the years is like, my daughter's wedding's coming up next week. Like, how do I like stay on plan during it? And my first question is like, well, is that the number one priority for your daughter's wedding is, your nutrition plan? If you put that into AI, it'll give you some good tips and tricks, but is that the kind of mindset that's really going to keep this a sustainable goal at the end of the day? I would argue for most people, not, or at least having the conversation would be important. And then the other one is like prioritizing actions. I think we've all probably, if we've worked with somebody on changing lifestyle, you've probably met the person who's like, all right, currently I don't exercise at all, but I'm going to start with 6 days a week, 2 hours a day. I'm also throwing out everything in the fridge. I'm going to meditate twice a day on top of that. And I don't know, start my 20-minute journaling sessions as well. And you're like, okay, like all those things seem great, but like, what's the first step here? Versus if you put that into ChatGPT, it's probably, all right, here is your like minute by minute schedule to implement that plan that you're never going to actually stick to at the end of the day. And the last one I'm going to say is just like human connection, phone calls and such. Like that phone call is just gathering pure information. Sure, it can work, but can it do it in a kind, empathetic manner where it's very fluid? There's not like a strict schedule or a checklist to follow for this call, like many MI conversations are. I'll also say that I have my doubts that somebody would feel same sense of partnership and accountability to a computer or an algorithm they would another human being, even if it was able to do that. So I think that human connection, being able to do those phone calls, is something that's going to be more and more common, and that I wouldn't be surprised if we do more and more in the coming years at Verta. So kind of with all that said, like some things that I could see coming in the near future is one, like I said, more kind of chat bots or assistants that are gathering lots of information so that when a human being is coming in, it's much more complicated challenges, which as a coach myself, I'd be very happy if I can just, really coach at the end of the day and not have as much of that overhead getting to the core of an issue. Another one, admin work. So documentation, things like that, especially in healthcare. I think there's a huge opportunity there for AI to listen, summarize, and put into a note, which would also be great because then, doctors and other healthcare professionals don't have to spend an inordinate amount of time documenting every interaction they have with somebody. I think the bigger picture of like what this means is that coaches, maybe even providers, can work at a deeper level and probably with more people at easier pace. So overall, I think I'm pretty encouraged, but we'll see. It's a quickly evolving landscape. And then just kind of tying it all together of what I've learned over the years from being at Verta. I'd say the first one is that, people generally really want to be healthy. Like, sure, they encounter challenges and lifestyle change is hard. And there's certainly, I think, people out there who just, want the pill or want the quick fix. But especially, I think, with our weight loss population, most people have tried many, many times over, years, if not decades, to make changes in our, you can tell that they're struggling, just have not been given the right set of tools. So I think we can all play a role there since, I guess, A, I think healthcare's come a long way from blaming and shaming to where we're at today, but B, still plenty of room to improve in that sense of giving people the right tools and approaches. The other one would be the power of collaboration. So I've seen that with a coach provider teamwork in at Verta, but I think in other healthcare settings too. Like people are complicated at the end of the day, and having different perspectives super valuable. And then the last couple is I think I've really benefited from my nutrition background as a dietitian, both having the kind of clinical expertise on knowing how to give guidance and what are the nuances between different nutrition approaches, while also being able to guide somebody through that stage of change. I think it's really hard. If I didn't have either of those skills, it'd be really hard to do my job. So I think that combination of some sort of expertise with MI is super powerful. And then how this is going to look with, tools and tactics, though, going to definitely continue to evolve, especially with AI and technology growing so quickly. All right, that is all I've got. So I'll stop sharing my screen so I can see everybody.
Excellent. Thank you, Tyler. We have a few minutes. I've sat through probably a half a dozen Verta Health webinars over the year talking about, the ROI on your services and the benefits, but I've never received this unique insight of the coach, the client relationship. So we do have some questions. Do you offer these in group sessions?
We've experimented with group sessions over the years for specific things. So I guess sometimes, but not as an ongoing basis. But I think that's definitely like one of those things where if a lot of the day-to-day simpler messages are taken care of from an AI tool or assistant, like that's definitely something that we could do more of.
Please feel free to come off mute or raise your hand if you'd like to ask Tyler a question.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking through.
Otherwise, I will read a bunch in the chat.
Yeah, and see
Is
like
there any issue around confidentiality? I know with AI and it sounds like you have a dashboard where you can see how they interact, the questions. Is there confidentiality in any of this?
I mean, yeah, it can be, I guess, would be the thing. Definitely people more tapped into that know all the legal back end stuff, but any AI service we use has to be HIPAA compliant. And then they also cannot, like the AI service that we use, have built a lot of our products on, cannot then use that information to train their models. So I think that depends. You have to like, depends on the business agreement, but would not ever put like patient information into just like your general consumer version of like ChatGPT, for instance.
Yeah, Molly asks, if patients or clients prefer text versus phone, the spoken word, and how's that?
It's an interesting, like my assumption going into Verta was that, oh, people are going to want phone calls all the time, and that's the thing. And I'd say it just depends. I've had plenty of people over the years that like, yes, I want maybe like a bi-weekly or monthly call, especially at the beginning, because that's just how I communicate better, given our patient population then too. A lot of people with type 2 diabetes tend to be older, maybe less, not phone or technology internet natives. So, definitely preferred that. But there's plenty of people too who are maybe it's like the, busy parent who's working one job, has a side hustle, and they're like, no, like I can barely have time, for everything I have to do now, let alone like a 20 or 30-minute phone call. So the text work, really well for that person. So it really depends, and that's why we have, both options available.
Yeah, Stephen has a question. Why don't you join us, Stephen?
And just a comment and a quick question, Tyler. First, it was beautiful, all the work you put into organizing a gazillion different ideas. So, thank you. Just tons and tons of wisdom and experience. So, thanks for putting so much together. Quick question on the planning side. I've been very interested in the structured tool, brief action planning. Have you heard of it? Do you use it to use a structured tool for planning?
Funny you should ask. I'm like right now part of a project of kind of giving better, call guidance, especially for follow-up calls, and that was one framework that we're thinking about helping. So I'm sure that we have coaches who do use that and are familiar with it currently, but it's not like built into our like current guidance, but it might be within the next few months or so.
Yeah, Michelle had a great question. How do you involve the client into primary or endocrinologist? Do you send chart notes, care plans?
Yeah. So people can like say if they want their PCP or endo to receive updates from us, and then we'll send faxes throughout their care. I think the current events that like trigger a fax, there's like an intro, here's what we're doing, and then anytime we have new lab results or anytime we make a medication change to their diabetes medications. Um, so how well that works, I'd say, is hit or miss. Sometimes it's really great, the endocrinologist is on board and they're really supportive. Other times they're like, I don't know what this is. They try to coordinate, like even time to talk and do a conference with our provider and their provider, but that's a whole nother thing. So I'd say we do it. Sometimes it works as intended, not all the time. So it'd be really great to have a better way to do it. But we do have ways too of like, I think there's a question on like how all the biomarker data is shared. And basically, like we will send everybody a meter and then a scale, and all that's being logged into our systems, and then they have access to it on their app. So oftentimes, like when it comes to a PCP visit or something like that, the easiest thing for somebody to do is to pull out their phone and be like, "Here's all of my blood sugars from the past 3 months. Here's their averages. Here's my last lab results I did," and that can help with coordinating too. Um,
Do you deal with any, CGM and pump data? Because that's all in the cloud.
Good question. So we'll prescribe pumps to some folks. It's rare. It's usually the person who's on, one or two types of different insulin is more complicated case. That's actually another trial we did recently was to see how outcomes compared to our standard approach, which is, maybe 1 to 2 finger pricks per day versus CGM. And so we got pretty similar outcomes. So for the right person, yes. On pump data, we don't currently take people on pumps. It's been very hard to manage virtually. So that's one we'd refer out to an endocrinologist. And then same thing, we work only with type 2 members right now. So type 1, where it's another like great use case for CGMs and pumps, just not something that
And you don't have any like social support, where all Verta Health clients can kind of interact socially or
we do actually. Yeah, that's another. I'm glad you asked that. We call it the community page, and it's essentially a patient-only forum where people can ask questions, share recipes, wins, things like that. So that's also built, into the app, and people can go on there whenever they'd like. And it's sometimes very interesting to the coach of like, I'm like, why are you not asking me this as your coach? But people like that peer-to-peer support. It's a lot more approachable at times or a lot more relatable. So I think it's another one, just like the phone calls and messages. Like, there's not going to be like, here's the approach for every person. It's going to be, here's, a few different options. I think group coaching is another example that would like just add another layer that it'll probably work great for some people. Other people, I can't imagine talking about this in a group setting. And you just got to have different options depending on
right.
preference.
Well, just opening it up. We're beyond the top of the hour, but if anybody has any additional questions, I just thought that was really insightful, having seen Verta from a different perspective, and then to get your perspective, it's really refreshing in the work you're doing. But Amanda has a question.
Hey Tyler, I have some questions about scaling. How did your company overcome like licensure barriers with providing MNT? Like, what was your guys' approach to, cover as much territory with probably as little providers as possible?
Yeah, great question. So all coaches work under a provider. which helps a lot with like the coach, gets rid of like the coach licensure issue with that from a legal perspective, from what I'm told from our legal team. So then it's a lot of the provider licensure, and our providers are just licensed in many different states is the very simple answer. So and there's we have a whole team that is dedicated to provider licensure, as well as making sure that the different state laws that the member is in align with the provider's licensure as well, because in certain states, people with type 2 diabetes must see an endocrinologist if it's in telemedicine. In other states, it could be a nurse practitioner. So lots of variables that go into it. And yeah, there's a whole team of people who are working to make sure we stay compliant in that regard.
And when you say provider, are you saying like it's a nurse practitioner or a physician, or are you using like dietitian, like as someone who would oversee coaches?
Good question. So yeah, currently it's MD or an NP who is the
Okay.
provider. So dietitians in the Virtus setting, you could say like maybe they can practice MNT, but not solely, so they're not necessarily like using their full scope of practice. Which is another, there's definitely been talks about could we realign things and have like a more complicated, member panel, and that's only RDs we hire for that team, because we'll certainly see people who come in not type 2 diabetes, but also IBS or something like that. As a dietitian, like, well, I could certainly give some recommendations, but it's also not really within our scope of practice there. So, but yeah, once you're under like the NP or the MD, then that helps kind of get rid of the state-to-state licensure for the coach side of things.
Gotcha. And one last question, in terms of like your success, maybe speaking to your clinical trials, does your program do like a prescribed follow-up framework? Like, do you encourage the members to follow up weekly? Are you looking at like once a month for 6 months? Like, what does that enrollment typically look like for you guys?
When you say follow up, you're saying like with the coach?
Like between the member and the coach, right?
Yeah. So there's no like prescribed approach, generally speaking, based on how I know, like, so most I'd say like the two ways that a coach and a member could connect is that either the member has a question or something they need help with and they send a message to the coach, or the coach gets like an alert for the member and reaches out, and they might summarize their biomarker data, follow up on a previous goal or a challenge, something like that. The way we have the alerts set up is generally we're reaching out to people about once a week on minimum. That said, once somebody engaged with us, usually that's going to be multiple messages a day, if not, 10, 20 messages in a week. And then after 90 days, it's a little bit more dependent on how well the person's doing. So it's kind of set up so that if somebody is doing generally well, they're logging in, numbers look good. It's more hands off. So maybe reaching out more like once a month or so. If they're not doing as well, or start backsliding, then the coach should be alerted automatically from there. So that's kind of
And you guys use AI to generate those alerts?
Yeah, it's like I think it's a machine learning model that takes into account a bunch of different factors that we've seen correlated with like overall outcomes and success.
Thank you.
Mike,
You're muted, Michael.
Michael, I
You're
think
muted.
I'm on mute.
So we're going to end it there. Great questions, Amanda. Tyler, so grateful for you to share some really rich insights about the work you do and Verda does. And I'll end it there. And Jody, if you have any additional comments.
Thanks, Michael. And I will just echo your kind and appreciative sentiments to Tyler. Thanks so much for making and taking the time, Tyler. I know we all came away with a much better insight, and both congratulations and thank you for what you're doing. I mean, the noble and large mission of impacting 1 billion people.